Iran is exploding from within. Hezbollah is armed to the teeth. Hamas is rearming, and the fallout from Venezuela, it's hitting the Middle East hard. Stay with us. This week's VFI News is critical. Well, friends, let's start with the news story that's on top of everyone's list this week, the ongoing revolt in Iran. I say revolt and not protest because although the terrible economic conditions might have been the spark that brought large numbers of Iranians out into the streets to protest against regime policies, that has changed. It is now a widespread revolt against the very existence of this regime, and the regime knows very well what's at stake. In fact, they may be on a stake. They are threatening to defend their existence with all the means at their disposal, and that includes violence and murder, which is what they know how to do best. This has worked in the past, but there's a few different reasons why it might not work this time. To start with, the Iranian people themselves have kind of run out of things to lose. Even if some of them might lose their very lives in violent clashes with regime security forces, as has in fact already happened, the lives of the Iranian people have been miserable for a long time. The economy has been poor for years for all kinds of reasons, starting with the terrible corruption and mismanagement of the regime, and also because of the sanctions the international community has placed on Iran due to its insistence on pursuing nuclear weapons. For years, the regime told its people that the economic hardships they were enduring were necessary to ensure that the great Iranian nation was not deprived of their rights as a great nation among nations. This implicitly included the nuclear program, as well as the other instruments of regime power, including their arsenal of ballistic missiles and the nuclear program, as well as the vast Russian-built air defense array that was deployed to defend the country from air attack. But then, in the 12-day war of June 2025, Israel neutralized the air defense array, destroyed Iran's air force on the ground, and achieved total air superiority within days. Then the ballistic missiles that were supposed to crunch Israel like a beer can proved to be almost totally useless because U.S. and Israeli air defense systems were so effective in shooting them down, sometimes even outside the atmosphere. Then, after they'd been softened up a bit by the Israeli Air Force, Iran's nuclear weapon sites were obliterated by the B-2 strategic bombers of the United States Air Force and a massive Tomahawk missile barrage by the United States Navy. All the things that the Iranian people had been told for years that they were sacrificing for so that the Islamic Republic would have the means to show the world its greatness were blown to bits in just 12 days, leaving nothing but shock, impotent rage, and disillusionment in its wake. Of course, the regime tried to spin it to their advantage, saying that they'd actually been able to inflict massive damage on Israel and that they were about to inflict a lot more when the Americans came to Israel's rescue and then imposed a ceasefire on both sides. This fairy tale, once upon a time, convinced a lot of people who wanted to believe it was true, but no one here in Israel believed it for even 1 second. I am sure most Iranians also didn't believe it, and I hope none of you out there believed it either. The truth is, while we suffered some painful damage here in Israel, and I saw it with my own eyes, Iran got the beating of a lifetime in the 12-day war, and that was just the beginning of their sorrows. Next, reports emerged that the winter rains weren't coming in many parts of Iran, extending a several-year-long drought that was actually visible from space as the reservoirs meant to supply major cities began to disappear. Then, another report came just a few weeks ago telling residents of Iran's capital, Tehran, that there was one list they were at the top of, having the worst air quality of any major city in the entire world. Can you believe it? Other Iranian cities also ranked high on this list, and this added to chatter about the possible need for Tehran's residents to be evacuated, which was never realistic because there's really nowhere for them to go. Of course, we want the Jewish people to make Aliyah from Iran that remain there. They're welcome here. Then came the final straw that broke the camel's back. Do they have camels in Iran? And I'm using that metaphor cautiously since we are here in the Middle East, so I hope no one accuses me of cultural appropriation. But I'm referring to the catastrophic drop in the value of Iran's national currency, the rial. Or is it real? Is it real? Which I talked about in last week's report when I said that it's gotten so useless, Iranians were better off using the bills for toilet paper instead of trying to use them to buy actual toilet paper. In fact, as they did with Osama bin Laden, they can put a picture of Ayatollah Khamenei on the toilet paper. Well, we got a lot of feedback for that joke, including from some Iranians who apparently watched this show and said it was brilliant and also true. The rial currency became functionally useless last week, and the shopkeepers and merchants in Tehran's Grand Bazaar said there was no point even trying to do business. So they closed up shop and poured out into the streets, as I said, soon to be joined by university students and others in what quickly escalated from angry protests to a full-scale revolt against the regime, complete with violent clashes and casualties on both sides. Like I said, the people of Iran don't have much to lose, as even their lives hold no hope of anything better. So many of them appear to be ready to lay everything down, including their own lives, on the line for a chance that those who survive can have something better. And I hope they will have something better with a regime change. Now, the regime has also been warned by U.S. President Donald J. Trump that if they commit mass violence against the protesters, he will commit terrible violence against them. And after the lightning raid last Saturday in Venezuela, everyone can see it's no idle threat. However, the regime is doing what it always does, gaslighting everyone, including itself. Regime officials are issuing absurd statements about how the United States had better not interfere in Iran's internal debate, or the Iranian armed forces will teach Uncle Sam a lesson he'll never forget. Well, they're also blaming Israel for inciting the masses against the regime, telling these poor, deluded people that the Islamic Republic is the source of all their problems instead of being their great hope, their shield against aggression, and so on. Friends, to switch briefly to commentary mode, I'm not sure if I've said this before or if it was said by someone else and I just agreed with them, but I'm going to repeat it here and now, that if the Islamic Republic of Iran was an individual human being, that individual would be a raging narcissist. That individual would have been lying to everyone, including themselves, for so long that they would have forgotten what the actual truth is, and they would have completely lost track of how obvious that truth is to everyone else. This regime has failed to deliver anything it promised to the Iranian people, and it's even failed to live up to its own standards and expectations. Thank God. It has been utterly defeated by the enemies it chose to have. No one in Israel has any desire to do anything against Iran, especially its people. We'd be very happy to leave them alone as long as they left us alone. But they are an evil regime that needs enemies to justify their own existence, and for what I would say are catastrophically stupid and self-defeating ideological reasons. They chose Israel and America to serve this purpose. Now they're eating the fruit of those decisions, and I don't blame them for not liking it, but I don't have any sympathy for them either. Now there's one more thing we have to talk about, and that's the possibility that the IRGC could, if they think they're about to be deposed, make a desperate bid to change the subject by launching an attack on Israel. This is alongside another concern about renewed conflict on Israel's northern border. The internationally recognized government of Lebanon and the Lebanese National Army had a deadline of December 31st in the year of our Lord 2025 to complete the disarmament of Hezbollah south of the Litani River. To their credit, the army did some important work, demolishing several Hezbollah strongpoints, bunkers, tunnels, and weapons caches. They also disposed of quite a bit of the unexploded ordnance from past conflicts that took place in these areas. But Hezbollah is still heavily armed and reportedly preparing for future operations against Israeli communities in the Galilee. To Israel's far south, the Houthis in Yemen are also rapidly expanding their arsenal of ballistic missiles to be ready to fire at Israel in a future conflict, although that threat might diminish depending on how things play out in Iran. However, the IDF Home Front Command is taking the possibility of future conflicts very seriously, and we're taking it very seriously here at Vision for Israel as well. That's why we're continuing to place bomb safety shelters in communities all over the country, and we're also responding to requests for equipment and supplies from medical first responders. We need more ambulances, community security teams need equipment, and firefighters. So please watch this short video about this very important project, and don't forget to go to our website, visionforisrael.com. After October 7th, 2023, which was considered the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, security teams were devastated along the southern border of Israel. From October 8th onwards, also Hezbollah in Lebanon, a terror group, also attacked in the northern part of Israel. Security teams turned to Vision for Israel for extra aid and help, and many of the items that we provided were ceramic vests for security teams to avoid bullet wounds as well as shrapnel wounds. We also needed to provide proper helmets. Most of these security teams had outdated equipment that hadn't been replaced in decades. In addition to that, there was a request for medic bags and defibrillators and for all sorts of medical disposables that were needed. Then as a result of these rocket attacks, also fires were erupting, and so we were requested to provide firefighting equipment and generators and protective clothing in order to put out these fires. And so Vision for Israel is very happy to come alongside the civilian security teams, the community security teams. We even bought a new police vehicle for one of the southern cities and dedicated it together with the mayor. It was in the city of Sderot, which was badly hit during the first days of the war, and the requests keep coming in, and we will continue to keep providing. Welcome back, friends, and anybody in Iran who might be watching. Now, I'm afraid we're not done talking about the security threats to Israel because the Hamas terror organization is still refusing to disarm in the Gaza Strip. Is this still going on? And has even begun something new. They're moving weapons and ammunition from the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt and into the Gaza Strip by using drones. Now, I have no idea how large the drones they're using are, and I'd venture to guess that they're not large enough to carry massive cargoes. So we're talking about a relative trickle of supplies that are making their way from Sinai into Gaza, but even a trickle is dangerous. And the IDF has invested substantial resources in trying to stop these drones. This will, of course, have an added benefit because, like they so often do, the IDF is sure to figure out some ingenious technical method for taking down drones, which is something the whole world is trying to figure out. I have seen this scenario play out so many times before that I have no doubt we'll see it happen this way again. Of course, I have my own ideas for an invention, and more about that later. Now, moving on, but sticking with the subject of smuggling, we need to talk about the repercussions of the American operation last Saturday to take down former Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. This military operation had and will continue to have all kinds of repercussions all over the world, including here in the Middle East. I talked about some of those repercussions in an emergency VFI news update, which I posted on social media this past week. So try and look it up and watch it. I encourage you to look for it because always once in a while I add little extra information that I gather from here in Israel. But there is a much bigger story that we need to dive into regarding the connections between Maduro's regime, narcotics trafficking networks, Hezbollah, and the IRGC. The short version of this story goes like this. Under Hugo Chavez, who was president of Venezuela from 1999 till his death in 2013, when he was succeeded by his vice president Nicolas Maduro, this oil-rich South American country became a global hub of narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and other criminal activities. Not coincidentally, it also became a major global ally of Iran and by extension Hezbollah. This continued when Maduro came to power in 2013, and Hezbollah raised enormous amounts of money by cooperating with narcotics trafficking syndicates and dirty banks in Venezuela over the years. Now, on that note, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said during an appearance on CBS Face the Nation program Sunday that in the 21st century, under the Trump administration, we are not going to have a country like Venezuela in our own hemisphere, in the sphere of control and the crossroads for Hezbollah, for Iran, and for every other malign influence in the world. Bravo! That's just not going to exist, he said. He added in an interview he gave to NBC's Meet the Press that there will be no more Iran-Hezbollah presence in Venezuela going forward. Bravo! Walid Fares, a leading expert on Hezbollah, told Fox News Digital that, quote, Hezbollah has a long history in Venezuela and has emerged as a significant security concern in Latin America, particularly after the September 11, 2001 attacks. The origins of Hezbollah's presence in Venezuela date back to the mid-1980s, when the organization began recruiting members from segments of the local Lebanese diaspora, unquote. He added that under the umbrella provided by the Hugo Chavez regime that Maduro was part of, quote, Hezbollah's presence became more visible, with reports indicating that some of its members gained access to Venezuelan state institutions, including security agencies, often through the acquisition of Venezuelan passports and legal documentation. These developments facilitated the expansion of Hezbollah-linked networks throughout Latin America, extending into Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, and reportedly reaching as far as the United States-Mexico border, unquote. Now, I have to interject here because although I'm certainly not an expert, I think it's safe to assume that these criminal syndicates that Hezbollah worked with also have extensive operations north of that border inside the United States of America. They're probably responsible for the deaths of many American police officers and civilians, possibly including someone you know if you're watching this, so you absolutely should take all this personally. Now, getting back to Fares, he added that Hezbollah is believed to maintain a substantial presence across Venezuela, including command and control elements in Caracas. Margarita Island has been frequently cited in open source reporting as a logistical hub used for activities ranging from financial operations to intelligence gathering and alleged narcotics trafficking. So people out there, you need to look at what's been happening in Venezuela for decades, and especially since Maduro's been in power. Now, Matthew Levitt, a scholar on Hezbollah from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy think tank, told Fox News Digital that there is now, quote, an opportunity to address the long-standing Hezbollah presence in Venezuela and the strategic relationship between Venezuela and Iran more broadly, unquote. With all that in mind, we probably shouldn't be surprised that Hezbollah issued a statement saying, quote, it condemns the terrorist aggression, American thuggery against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, unquote, and, quote, further affirms its full solidarity with Venezuela, its people, presidency, and government in confronting this American aggression and arrogance, unquote. I actually think Hezbollah is the one being arrogant here, and also very foolish. But the bottom line is that when President Trump decided to take down Maduro, he did so primarily because Maduro was a threat to U.S. strategic interests in the Western Hemisphere. However, this action has also served many American interests in other parts of the world, and it's also serving the interests of American allies, including Israel. It's also going to have some positive effects in Europe because the narcotics trade that Venezuela became such a massive center of under Maduro was largely directed at supplying drugs to criminal distribution networks in Europe. So to all those ninny hammers in Paris, London, Geneva, etc., who are clutching your pearls and beating your breasts about the violation of Venezuela's sovereignty, international law, etc., I say it's not impressing anyone. If you can't say thank you for the blow President Trump just struck for the civilized world, just don't say anything at all. Here in Israel, we're definitely saying thank you to President Trump and the magnificent men and women of the U.S. military and the Delta Force who carried out this very important and beneficial operation. I'd like to extend my personal thanks to them, and that adds to the thanks and congratulations that Prime Minister Netanyahu has already extended. Of course, this is going to make some people say, and indeed, some of the Maduro regime officials who remain in place have already said that this is all part of a Zionist plot to use America to fight our wars for us. I have been around long enough to know that there's no point in arguing with people who see a Zionist plot behind everything and anything. There's no denying that Israel will benefit from the removal of Maduro, and it's quite possible that intelligence provided by Israel was part of the planning for this operation. If that's enough to make some people say they smell a Zionist plot, then so be it. Now we're coming to the end of this week's report, so I'm just going to run through some of the other big stories making headlines in Israel this week. In fact, I need to do some running to lose more weight. Well, to start with, New York City's new mayor, Zohran Mamdani, wasted no time in moving on his anti-Israel agenda. Minutes after being sworn in on January 1st, he sat down to revoke several executive orders signed by his predecessor, Eric Adams. In fairness, undoing what one's predecessor did so is the path clear for one's own policies to be enacted is something that almost every mayor, governor, or president does shortly after coming into office. However, some of the executive orders Mamdani revoked had broad popular and even bipartisan support, and one in particular was shocking to many Jews and others, and that was the acceptance of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, which Adams' administration said included demonizing Israel and holding it to double standards as forms of contemporary anti-Semitism. Randy Mastro, Adams' first deputy mayor, said that rescinding this order requires some kind of explanation, adding that when there's no rationale or explanation other than you don't like Israel, there's consequences for that. Well, with all due respect, Randy, I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure Mamdani will face any consequences for this evil decision this side of eternity because the people who voted for him knew he intended to do this when they cast their ballots. It's almost incomprehensible to me how fast and how far New York City has gone down this path of anti-Jewish hate. For most of my life, New York City has been synonymous with the flourishing of Jewish life in America, but now the exact opposite is true. I am inclined to believe that this is a move of God, that he is making life in New York uncomfortable for Jews in the same way a mother eagle will make the nest her little eaglets are uncomfortable so that they will leave the nest, take wings, and soar above the clouds to Israel. God makes it very clear in his word that he wants the Jewish people to make Aliyah and live in the land that he promised to us. And this just might be his way of pushing the Jewish people out of New York City, out of their comfort zone. So here at Vision for Israel, we're taking the possibility of a large influx of Jewish people from New York, South Florida, Los Angeles, Toronto, London, Paris, Sydney, etc. very seriously. We've got several projects that help new immigrants and veteran immigrants as they make their way into the promised land. So please, again, watch this short video about how you can be part of being a blessing.
go out to the distributions, we just are enjoying to see the people when they come to us and they are so grateful. It's one thing to look at lists of names and all the people coming, but when we see them and when they come and when they sit there and then they meet us, we get to talk to them, we get to learn about their families and their needs beyond what we're giving them. That is the greatest expression of our faith in God and who Yeshua is for us, because if it wasn't for him being the provider for this organization, we wouldn't have what we have to give out. And the greatest of this is to give it with love. And that is our logo. That is our motto, to do it joyfully, to do it with love. We always like when we come together, the staff, make sure that when you go, you're cheering them up. It's not just the giving of the voucher, it's the giving of the spirit, to lift them up spiritually, to let them know that there are people behind them, that the support that we give is not just money, but it's much more than that. And that is our prayer, is for the spiritual and the physical restoration for our people.
We've now provided over 300,000 brand new school packs with their supplies inside for school children of all ages, but particularly the first and second grades. I just love it when we distribute and when a little child comes up and just hugs you on the leg or gives you a big hug and says thank you. And sometimes they may even have a runny nose. I think it's like one of the cutest things. It melts my heart so much. And I'm going, wow, I hope that when they grow up to be an adult and maybe they've been through the army and university and they have a profession, maybe that memory will stay with them for all those years and decades. And one particular event that we host every year is during the reading of the book of Esther. It's a holiday called Purim, a Jewish holiday. And we host about 400 victims of terror attacks every year with their families and the children. We set up arcades and we have like drumming, bongo lessons and basketball shooting, jumping on a trampoline. I love to get involved in the midst of the children and do the very same. I think that's what Yeshua was dwelling on in Scripture when he said to be as little children. And he said also in Matthew chapter 25, we read in the Gospels that when you've done it to the least of these my brethren, you've done it unto me. Welcome back, friends. Well, we're coming to the end of the report, but I want to continue with my always week after week tradition of ending with some good news. So here it is. In Paris this week, delegations from Israel and the al-Jolani regime met under the auspices of French and American officials to resume negotiations towards a security arrangement. This could, if a whole bunch of different things go the right way, lead to a much more stable Syria, and that would be good for Israel and everyone else in the region. The previous round of talks held in September and included Israel's demand for a humanitarian corridor to be open to the Druze community in the city of Sueda. The al-Jolani regime foolishly, in my opinion, turned this demand down, saying it was an unacceptable violation of sovereignty in Syria. Well, we'll see if this round of talks goes any better. And with that, I'm Barry Segal, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom, shalom.